I want to focus on another crucial blind spot of the political left, again highlighted by the delinquency of the ABC last night. On Media Watch last night, they focused on what they claim is pro-Israel bias in the coverage of Middle East conflict victims. As usual, they attacked News Corp media, particularly The Australian. Have a look.
Looking back at the Australians' coverage of the conflict, since the Hamas terror attacks of 7th of October killed nearly 1,200 people, there are numerous heart-wrenching stories of the victims, showing their photos, giving us their names and ages, telling us who they were and how they were killed or captured, and allowing us to feel the horror and dreadful pain of the families left behind. But guess what? Almost all these victims are Israeli. Almost none are Palestinian, with the Australian running around 40 stories in the paper humanising Israeli victims and only 3 doing the same for Palestinian victims, even though 20 times as many Palestinians have been killed in the conflict, and even though almost 2 million are homeless and hungry.
Look, of course, the casualty figures cited are impossible to verify for starters. All the information out of Gaza is controlled by the terrorist organisation of Hamas. Israel operates under the rule of law as a democratic nation, and journalists can safely speak with victims or their families. Hamas has deliberately turned Gaza into a war-ravaged badland run by its terrorists where reporting is nigh on impossible. If Hamas soldiers dress themselves in civilian clothes and operate out of schools and hospitals, who can accurately report on the reality of civilian casualties? Of course, media, indeed anyone with an ounce of humanity, will be concerned about innocent casualties on any side. It doesn't mean they can accurately all be reported. Media Watch went on to quote a study of the language used in prominent US papers.
But a lack of stories putting faces and names to Palestinian suffering is just the start. The Intercept study also found the language in the New York Times, LA Times and Washington Post was biased towards Israel.
The term slaughter was used by editors and reporters to describe the killing of Israelis versus Palestinians 60-1, and massacre was used to describe the killing of Israelis versus Palestinians 125-2.
It's difficult to comprehend anyone actually trying to make this argument. The words slaughter and massacre are used for the Israeli terrorist killings on October the 7th because that is what they were. 1,200 Israelis, men, women, children, babies, the elderly, they were slaughtered, massacred, tortured. I've seen the videos. We can't show you them on air. And of course, more than 200 others were kidnapped. Dozens of them have been killed. 130 are still being held. This was an atrocity, deliberate slaughter, deliberate massacre and hostage-taking. That, Paul Barry, is why those words are appropriate. Paul Barry needs to understand the meaning of those words. To suggest that reporters should tell us that Israel has massacred or slaughtered innocent Palestinians just gives away a grotesque anti-Israel bias and disregard for the facts. There is no evidence Israel has targeted civilians. There's no evidence it's been reckless about civilian lives. And this is not to deny the tragedy of civilian deaths. All innocent lives do matter, but facts matter too. Still, there's more.
And here in Australia, a preliminary analysis for the Islamophobia Register by Dr. Susan Carland found Instagram posts from The Australian and 9 News all humanised Israeli victims, but not Palestinians, with the ABC the only one to give equal coverage to both sides. The big Australian newspapers we looked at have failed to cover the Gaza conflict fairly in terms of giving equal weight to the victims on each side.
Mate, this is deadly serious stuff. This is human lives and the future of Israel and the aspirations of the Palestinian people. To pretend it should be some equal coverage caper like a federal election campaign when news organisations try to have even out the coverage between Liberal and Labor misses all the important points here. This is a battle between a sovereign state in Israel that had more than 1,200 of its people deliberately slaughtered by a terrorist organisation in Hamas. Hamas is committed to the annihilation of all Jewish people. And while Hamas has been in control of Gaza for almost 2 decades, it's not only terrorised and killed Israelis with deadly rocket fire for years, it's deliberately triggered this war and imperilled its people using them as human shields. Hamas could end this war tomorrow by handing over the remaining hostages and surrendering its terrorist cells. Then the tragic deaths and injuries to innocent Palestinians would come to an abrupt end. And then perhaps the world's media could go and talk to innocent Palestinians about their trauma under Hamas and the war and how they plan to rebuild from the ruins that Hamas has delivered.